Good morning, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. If you want to come down and sit down, we got plenty of seats right in the front. What happened to January? It's like, psh, it was gone. Holy cow. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and get started. And first off, I'm going to introduce my boss, Dr. Frank Gilbert. He runs the Test Development and Measurement Office for Orange County, which includes both Bear and I. I'm sorry, Frank. And and then also the Test Development Center, which is the one that develops both the common final exams and the progress monitoring activities, the PMAs, which is Casey Liberset and Michelle Paul. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Gilbert.
So I introduced myself as the Director of Test Development and Measurement. I always explain that I'm the most popular person in the district. Oh boy, here comes the testing guy. And so first off, I want to thank you for the hard work that you all do and the value of quality assessment, giving the kind of feedback that we need to inform instruction as well as informing our patrons. The legislature this year decided to solve a large and burning problem that they had heard much about for many years. And that problem was that teachers would come up and they would say, we lose the entire spring to assessment. We start in February and it just goes all the way to the end of the school year and we just don't get to do anything else. And so the legislature came up with a solution. And most families have language that you end up with words that just your family uses. In my family, we have one we call a half-good idea. And that term came about when my son was in grade school and he decided he was going to learn to shoot a bow and arrow, and he got very good at it. He could throw a plate up and hit it with the arrow and all of that. But he grew tired of chasing after the arrows, having to go and pick up the arrow. And so he thought, well, I'll tie a small bungee cord to the arrow and then when he shot it, it would come back, and it did. And fortunately, his reactions were quick enough. He survived that experiment, but that was when we coined the term. It was a half-good idea because it created at least as many problems and perhaps more than it solved. So the legislature's solution was, we're going to compress the testing of all the high-stakes assessments, the common finals, the AP, the state assessments are all going to be in the month of May. And you know culturally about the month of May and field days and field trips and graduation and baccalaureate and senior skip day and all of those things that are culturally very popular. And so I'm anticipating that this is going to be wildly unpopular. Even less popular than I am now. But it's important for us to have our ducks in a row so that we cannot be the person they point to. Oh, this was a good idea, but it wasn't executed well at this school district or that school district or that school building. So I'm thanking you in advance for the hard work that it's going to be to make this as pristine an administration so that we can say we did everything according to the rules. And therefore, we can shift that unpopularity up to the legislature where it belongs. So I know it's going to be a challenge. I know it's going to be a stretch. I know it's going to be inconvenient. We all know that. And that gets to the other family saying we have, which is it's always easy from the outside. And for some reason, we're most confident about those things that we know the least about. And I think we're going to be the beneficiary of that this year. So thank you. I recognize the challenge. I appreciate your focus and attention to it. You've got some of the best leadership in the state helping you with that. Please avail yourself of it. Please avail yourselves of all the resources that we provide. And again, thank you and good luck.
I hope everybody is here for the spring FSA training for the spring testing. If you're not, you're welcome to stay, but you may want to run for the door. How many of you all feel like this right now? Yeah, there is a huge tornado coming, and it's going to be a little bit crazy, we know, but we're going to get through this. It's happened, it will happen again, and we will get through it. And we are the ones that are going to help you through it. Wicked Witch of the Test, that's me. I'll test you, my pretty, and your little dog, too. Yeah, we're going to test everybody. Those of you that have been doing this, and I see some very familiar faces and a lot of new faces out here, but myself and the Tin Man, Barrington Maxwell, my counterpart, are going to help you through this. Now, we have split up the district just to make it a little bit easier, and so we can respond a little bit faster to you. I have the East, Southeast, and STO learning communities, and the charters, A through O and alternatives, and Barrington's got the West, Southwest, North, and innovation learning communities, and the charters P through Z. Now, that does not mean that if you can't get a hold of Barrington, you can't call me or vice versa. We do that just so that everybody isn't sending all of us the emails together. Excuse me, it's going to be hot in here. Sending all of us. What we were finding was we were both responding to all the emails, which made it really slow. So what we're going to do is we split it up. So if you just give us a call first, the one that you're assigned to, if you can't get a hold of one of us, certainly you can call the other person. If you don't know and you can't get a hold of either one of us and you've got a real issue, you can also contact Jeanette Figueroa. You met her out at the front desk. Are you guys hearing me in the back? Yes. Okay, with this? Okay. I feel like I'm yelling. She also handles the ordering of materials, accounts, and password resets, and can get in touch with us. I think for now, there's very few times when we're out of the office from now until June, I think. There are a few days. Barrington was just out last week at a wedding. I will be out, I think, next Friday taking a class, but there's very few times, almost no time that we're both out of the office from now until June. So if you need to get in touch with us, get in touch with us. There are no such thing as stupid questions, okay? We used to say stupid questions are our specialty. We will never make you feel silly or stupid for asking questions. If you ask a question and we answer it and you go back and you think, I still don't quite understand it, please come back and ask us again. We would rather you ask the questions and get it right and do it right the first time than to do it wrong. Because with state testing, wrong has consequences. We've got third graders that are going to be taking the test to go up to fourth grade. We have at the high school, there's a lot of ramifications. You have your school grade resting right on top of all these scores. So please never hesitate to give us a call, ask us questions. Now you can either call us or email. Email is sometimes quicker because again, I can only take one phone call at a time, but we've got email open literally all day long and into the evening. So if you call us and can't get a hold of us and you really need to speak to us, it's an emergency. Now, please make sure that it truly is an emergency. But if you need to speak to us right away, just send us an email and say, Cindy or Barrington, please call me. And make sure you put your phone number on there and we'll call you right back. Because again, we're just constantly on the phone. Do you remember the number that Frank pulled from last year? I think we were fielding about, what, 3,000 phone calls a day, something, and emails. I mean, it was crazy. It wasn't quite that much, but it was a lot.
It was 4,000 calls for the month of April.
That's what it was. It was 4,000 calls for the month of April. So we're getting several hundred a day. And again, a lot of those are compacted on those first couple of days. But we tend to be very busy. We're at our desk, but sometimes it can be hard to get through. We will get back to you. We always get back to you the same day if at all possible, unless you email us very late in the day. So let's move on. Test dates. There are our test dates. We have had these out since August. So please make sure you abide by these. April 2nd is the writing component. Now, a lot of people have asked about these dates. Yes, you do need to test on that date for the bulk of your kids. If you are finding that you're having trouble with rooms and getting all of those kids done on one day, you may elect to do your, say, take your ESE groups and test them during the makeup window. We would like you to get as much done during that day. You do need to test all regular students and as many of your ESE and ELL as you can. But if you're finding your one-on-ones, you know, those kids that need the one-on-one testing, and you've just run out of test administrators, you may elect to go ahead and do those on a makeup day. Just those oddball ones that, you know, always take up a lot of time. Okay, that goes for the reading, which is April 2nd and 3rd. Oh no, sorry, that's the retake, isn't it? No, it isn't. That's the grade 3, sorry. Grade 3, I've been writing up my middle school training all last week. So April 2nd and 3rd is your 3rd grade reading component. Okay, May 1st and 2nd is the reading session 1 and 2 for grades 4 and 5. And May 6th and 7th is the math for those days. And again, you see those makeup windows. You can still do makeups. Those are allowed, but we do need you to have a testing day where you're going to get the bulk of your testing done on those days. Okay, the materials. We're going to be talking about writing, reading, math, and science today. So we're going to cover it all. I know it's going to be a lot of material, but hang in there. How many of you all are brand new and have never done this before? Quite a few. Okay, how many of you all have done this 10 years or more? Okay, I want all the newbies to look. There's a lot. You will survive this. You're going to feel very stupid at the end of the day, at the end of this training. Okay, it's going to feel like, oh my God, I don't understand any of it. We're going to get you through this. What we are going to do is show you where things are in the manuals. You're going to keep the PowerPoint and make sure that you copy down the dates. We're going to give you some resources. We can't possibly, even in 3 hours, tell you every little single thing you need. But that's why we are here as a resource, and we're going to point you. Hopefully you will have an idea of the overview of what this is going to look like, and you will survive this. You are going to get through. Oh, and by the way, by the end of this, you're also going to be singing Follow the Yellow Brick Road all the way home, if you haven't just figured out the trend yet. Okay, they are based on the manual, which you do have. You should have received these already. If you need additional ones, the girls are going to be upstairs, or if you have materials that you need to pick up for Access for L's, you can go up to the 7th floor after the training. Please be patient, because I suspect a lot of you all do need additional, to pick up your Access materials, and also would need manuals. We do not have any materials yet for this, the test materials, but you can pick up additional manuals. Please do not overestimate how many manuals you need. We do have a lot up there, but if you look around and how many schools we have, elementaries, please only pick up what you need. But Jeanette and the girls will be up there. I'm suspecting there will be a line, so just be a little patient. We've got all the secretaries up there that are going to be helping out, and as soon as we're done, Barrington and I will also come up, and we'll get you out of there just as quick as we can.
I also want to add that if you've ordered Access for Else materials and you received an email that they're ready, then they're ready. If you order them, you did not receive an email, then that means they're not ready. So I wouldn't go upstairs because Jeanette wouldn't have them ready for you. All right. Same thing goes for manuals. If you haven't yet ordered manuals, I believe when I spoke to Jeanette this morning, any order that was submitted before 4:30 on Friday have all been filled. Anything that was done over the weekend, you probably will be able to get them either later on this afternoon or tomorrow morning.
Okay. So, all your instructions are in there. Feel free to mark those up, chop them up however you want to do that. Please make sure you give these to your teachers. Manuals are not secure. Now, we don't want them keeping them, and you do collect them at the end, but please be sure that you get these into the teacher's hands, because there's nothing worse than trying to go into a secure test for which your VAM scores and the school's grade and whether kids get to go up to the next grade level rests. And I've never looked at this before. Even if you've done training, they should be familiar with the script. They should be able to mark it up, highlight it, just like you can. Okay, so don't hesitate to give these to the teachers. Session lengths for writing, it's one 120-minute session for only grades 4 and 5. The reading is administered over 2 days, 2 80-minute sessions. And math for grades 3 through 5 are 2 80-minute sessions. Okay? You cannot switch those around, and you cannot administer 2 in 1 day. So don't ask. I don't care if the kid was absent up until that very last day. It is not fair for a student to take a test that everybody else was administered on 2 days, and this student only got 1 day. It's not an accurate measure of what that student knows. This is a standardized test, and there are standardized rules. That's what a standardized test is. It means that every student was administered the test under the same conditions. You can't change those conditions for some students. Okay, what's new? Everything's on paper. They took a way step back. We figure next year we might be on tablets, and we're talking the stone kind with chisels. Who knows? You know, we might be working with, who knows, papyrus paper. They seem to be going backwards rather than forwards. So we'll see what happens. There are no audio passages for grades 3 through 5 reading. So that is gone, so you do not have to worry about AVA. That assessment viewing application for kids that were testing on paper, but still needed that listening portion. That is gone for 3 through 5 reading. You are strongly encouraged to get your kids onto a paper-based test. It is going to be different. Some of your 5th graders have been testing for 2 years on computer, and they haven't tested on paper in a while. It is very important that they get that experience again and know, so they know what's coming up. It's also going to prepare them for responding to different types of test items. This is not strictly multiple choice. There are other types of item responses on there. There will be more information about those different kinds of responses coming. I believe the curriculum office has already sent some out, and we also will be sending some out. So just be on the lookout for that coming up shortly. There's going to be some videos that you can show to your kids that's going to walk them through those different response types so that it's familiar to them. There's a new answer document tracking report when we send stuff back. And this is going to be important. As you send things back, you will be able to go out there and ensure that your materials have shown up. Now, Bear and I are also going to do it, but it's important that you also check. These are your materials and your school materials. And for those of you that have been doing this for a while, you know that you can undo all of your hard work at the end by packing errors, and we'll be talking about that later. But if you send your materials to the wrong place, they are not going to get scored until late reporting, which means that your scores may not be there in time for the initial release of school grades. And how happy do you think your principal's going to be if you end up with an I because you didn't have any test scores because you sent them someplace, that you weren't supposed to. So we'll walk you through all that. But it is very important that and we'll put more information about this as we get closer so that you can track your reports and see that they actually arrived where they were supposed to be. And that way you can say, okay, everything is good. English language learners. The district last year had changed or actually I guess it was the year before, said that every ELL student must sit for the reading test and math test in FSA. Well, the state has now followed suit. So there are no more exemptions for students that are less than 1 year, even from the state. All ELL students must sit for the test. The front cover of the test books don't contain bubbles to grid the demographic information. You must have an ID label. You get the pre-IDs, which we did about 2 weeks ago. So they are current as of that. We are going to send another file on March 1st, which will be for the reading and math. When you get your materials. You will so it'll be current as of March 1st once you test in May, but you will still have more to do. So when we get to the point of doing the TIDE training, you do need to participate in that. Because you will need to know that's an online training. It's already on the training calendar, but you do need to know how to do that. Because you will need to print out PreIDD labels for those students or printed labels for those students that you didn't get labels for. Okay. Please start working with your registrar now to ensure all of your students have the Flea ID number. This has been an ongoing issue. You will not get results back if you do not have a Flea ID number on that student. And Flea ID number of FL 000000 is not a Flea ID number. That's just none. FL 004800 264 389 is not a Flea ID number. By just putting in the district number, that doesn't work either. Okay, it must be an official Flea ID number. So start working with your registrar now to ensure that if kids are missing them, that they have gone in and worked with student enrollment to make sure they have that. Okay, I'm going to start moving a little bit quicker here because we've got a lot of slides to cover. Schools designated as calibration schools. In the past, we always had to get those materials in early. Now, all you would do is you will get labels that are striped instead of the normal colors. And we'll talk much more about this when we talk about the return of materials. But just know that you will get a different type of return label if you are designated a calibration school. So it's nothing to panic over, and we'll fully explain that. The writing assessment, it's on 3 lined pages. In their test and answer books. You cannot give them additional paper. We are still getting people who are sending back, especially kids who are very prolific, whether it's understandable or not, and they just keep writing and putting words down. You should be working with them now to ensure that they know that they only have 3 pages to write on. That's all that will be scored. Yes, ma'am.
Do they have more than one planning sheet though?
Pardon?
They have more than one planning sheet?
Yes, they may have more than one planning sheet if they really want it, but be careful, because what we're seeing on those planning sheets is that kids are doing all their writing on the planning sheet, and then they run out of time. They do not get additional time to do the transfer of the writing on the planning sheet. So I would say most kids should not need more than one. Be very careful. Don't just start giving them multiples because you're worried about them needing more paper, because that just encourages them to write on the planning sheet and not the actual booklet. Okay? Okay. Testing accommodations. If you aren't already familiar with the FSA Accommodations Guide, you should get yourself very familiar with that. Make sure your ESE person, your staffing specialist, has a copy of it. This is what outlines what accommodations are allowed on the FSA and all state assessments. It includes instructions for administering the accommodations for computer-based tests, which doesn't affect you guys, but just be aware that that's out there. You can go out to the TIDE portal. You do not have to sign in. You just click on resources and then go to manuals and guides, and it's the first one that's listed on the list of guides. Okay, for students taking an FSA writing test using the flexible responding, which means they're typing on a computer, and there are a few kids like that. The transcription of the response into the test is not required. There are directions for returning the typed writing responses in Appendix A of the manual. Just make sure you follow those instructions clearly. So if a student has flexible responding because somebody thinks that their writing isn't legible, or for whatever reason they've got that typed response, you must type in Notepad. That is the little piece on the computer which allows them to do the typing, but they do not have access to spell check, thesaurus, and all those other things. It's just flat typing. Okay? If students are using that, it is very important that they know how much typing they can do. Okay? So just be aware that it's not something that should be put on a student's IEP the week before testing. There are a lot of seats up here. If you have seats beside you that are empty, please raise your hand. We've got all those folks on the floor. So yeah, there's a whole lot here in the front. There's some right down here in the front and a lot scattered in the middle. So if you still want to sit on the side, please get up and let some of these folks get in so that they don't have to be sitting on the floor. This is going to be a little bit of a long training. And so if you're on the side and you've got seats next to you, here, let me move this. Go ahead and stand up and let them in, please. If I sat on the floor that long, I'd never get back up again. Okay. You're required to report whether students have testing accommodations on their IEP plans. You also, which we've done, we also have to maintain records of the accommodations provided and accommodations used. We will be going through that a little bit later. As far as communicating with parents, there are parent letters. They will be posted on the IMS page. Have they been posted yet? I don't think so, but they will be up there probably later on this week, if not later on today, about electronic devices. please let your parents know that those kids that have smartwatches, cell phones, to encourage their kids when the teacher asks for them to turn them back in. We're still getting a lot of kids that get caught later after the test, but before they were released from school, from the room, so that we know they had it during the test. They'll whip that phone out. And so, and some parents have told their kids that they're not to give their phone to anybody else. So, you know, so they just leave it. So make sure you communicate that. The testing rules acknowledgement that the kids will sign. The calculator policy. Kids are not allowed to use a calculator in 3 through 5. About leaving campus. If you leave campus before the test is complete, in other words, if they have dentist appointment or something and she pulls them out in the middle of the test, that student's going to be invalidated. They cannot come back once they've left campus and complete the test. Discussing test content after testing. We'll talk about this one a little bit later. And working independently. Okay, also, and here's just further information. The electronics device policy, the testing rules acknowledgement, leaving campus. Discussing the content after testing. This is an important one because when we first started having this acknowledgement about 4 years ago, I think, and kids would go home and the parent would say, well, how was testing? I'm not allowed to tell you anything about it. Well, that didn't sit well with a whole lot of parents, and I'm seeing a lot of head shaking. Yeah, you remember that. Trust me, I caught quite a bit of that too. So, it is not that we don't want them to talk about the test. We don't want them to talk about specific items on the test. We don't want them talking about, well, I really had a question. There was a passage about Amelia Earhart, and she was, you know, the lady that flew across and got lost and all of this stuff. And then there was a question about this. They don't want them doing that because, again, we do see these items, not usually the next year, but usually the year after that, and it is very expensive to write these items. But as far as, yeah, I think I did really well, that's perfectly fine for this. Okay, working independently, again, we're still getting a lot of invalidations of cheating and kids, you know, not working on their own. So please make sure that they have this. We've even gotten, how many of you all know about the Cavion invalidations? Okay, a couple of you. It's been fairly rare at elementary, but it has been getting more and more. We see it every administration at the middle schools and high schools. What they do is they monitor the responses of kids, and kids who are in the same room that have identical responses, both right and wrong, for a certain percentage of the test will be invalidated because it's statistically almost impossible for those kids to have taken the test independently. Now, they're not saying the students cheated, but we can't validate that they did take the test independently because there is such a high incidence of exact right and wrong answers. And after all the years that we've been doing Cavion, I think I've only had maybe 1 or 2 out of literally hundreds of these where the kids were not sitting right next to each other when we go back and look at the seating charts. Which again, you have 2 kids sitting right next to each other and they have a 97% identical answers, both right and wrong. You know that they were not taking that test independently of each other. So they will be invalidated. So we are starting to creep into elementary. Just wanted you to be aware of it. We've only had a couple, but just be aware those teachers need to be on their toes to make sure that their kids are on their own test and not communicating somehow. Okay, Appendix A provides information concerning the accommodations. I would say accommodations are probably the most problematic area that we have in testing, because every year I get a parent calling and saying, my student did not get the accommodations. And we go back and the teacher says, I didn't know that student got accommodations. It is critical that you talk with both your staffing specialist and your CCT to make sure that they work with you to determine which of those kids get accommodations and which accommodations they are. And I would say the teacher should know that information several days before test date. Do not give it to them the day of the test. That is such a crazy day, and everybody is kind of hyped up, and everybody is on edge and afraid of doing something wrong, but there's a lot to remember. So they should have that list of kids in their room that get the accommodations and which accommodations they are, and that list should be double and triple checked by you, the CCT staffing specialist, and somebody else in the school that knows those kids to ensure that they don't fall through the cracks. Because the only fix for that is we either invalidate the test or we let it go through as is. We do not retest students on the state test. Okay, students eligible participating in grades 4, 5, and grades 3 reading. They can have large print. The Brailles, 1 item per page. We need to make sure that those are correct. We already have that information from the vision department. Thank you. Little brain fart there. From the vision department. So we have that information. We don't send that to them, do we? Of which ones we have? Okay. So we've already taken care of that. But if you do have an ESE student who is not vision impaired, but does have large print on their IEP, you have to do the special request for paper accommodations. No, they don't. They don't have to do it since it's all paper. For large print, they do? Okay, for large print, you do have to do the special request, so it's verified by the ESE department. And we'll be talking about that in length in a little bit. Okay, again, on their IEP or 504, it must be on there. And for those special accommodations, now we've already taken care of Braille and large print for the vision kids, but if you have a large print for a non-vision student, then that is due to us by March 1st. Okay, your job got a lot easier with this when we did go back to paper, because now you don't have to worry about those kids that couldn't test on the computer. Okay, instructions for administering large print and 1 item per page are in Appendix A. Scripts and instructions for Braille are available on the FSA portal. And they're also provided with your Braille test materials. So if any of your vision teachers want to start taking a look at that, they can print those scripts and instructions off of the FSA portal. Again, you just go out to the portal, go to resources, and it's under there.
Cindy, can you go back to when you were talking about March 1st and explain that one more time?
Oh, it's that one? Yeah, that is the request for paper-based accommodations for students that should be taking it on computer. So the only one that really falls under that is large print, because again, that's not the normal paper that they would be getting. Okay? Okay, the following materials will be provided for students participating in the writing, reading, and math administrations. The test and answer books, they're all one document now. You do not have separate answer sheets and booklets. Planning sheets for the writing only. The reading and math, if they want to take notes or do calculations, they are to be done in the book. Yes, ma'am.
So no more separate bubble sheets for fourth and fifth?
No, nope. All one test and answer book for everything. That's for science as well.
No, science is separate.
Oh, science is still separate. Sorry, that's his part. Science is still separate. But for reading, math, and writing, there's just one test and answer booklet.
And for math, they will not be able to use scrap paper. It has to.
They have to do their figuring in the booklet. So there's no more writing folders or work folders or worksheets for math and reading. They do their figuring or note-taking in the booklet. Calculators are not permitted for grades 3 through 6 in math, so you don't have to worry about those. The writing planning sheet. All students receive the planning sheet they may use to take their notes and plan their responses. The testing rules acknowledgement is on the back of that, so it's very important that each student get one. They're distributed with the test booklets at the beginning of the writing. They are secure documents. You will not be returning to us in the DAC boxes. We'll talk about those later. But you do need to keep those under locked storage because a lot of information is on those.
How long do we have to keep them for? To the
2 years? Isn't that what you said?
So the following school year,
The following
Until
school
the
year.
grade scores come out.
The
and
scores come out and you get, yeah,
September.
Okay.
yeah. Okay. Did I skip one? Test group codes. Test group codes is a code that you make up at your school. It is, it's used to identify the groups of kids that test together. So when you go and set up your testing and you're going to group the bins together and, or get your bins ready, you're going to put the booklets in the bins, you're going to put the list of kids with their, if any accommodations they get, the writing paper, if you're giving the teacher stopwatches or clocks, whatever else is in their pencils. You also should have the test group code written somewhere on the roster. It's any number you want to make it, usually 4 digits, and you can assign it by room number. You can assign it by 4001, 4002 for grade 4. However you want to do it. You keep track of those, but that identifies each group of kids that tested together. So if a student is not in that test group, so you've got this group of kids that tested together, but Johnny was absent, you're now going to test Johnny in a makeup session. He gets his own group code with that makeup session. He does not get a new group code. And that goes for reading and math, is 2 sessions. You give them the group code during session 1, but he misses session 2. So session 2's on a makeup day. There's only room for 1 test group code on the sheet, isn't there, or are there 2?
There's one for each session.
There is 1 for each session. I take that back. So he will get a different one. If you are testing that same group of kids together for both session 1 and session 2, they can use the same group code twice. Okay? And you could also do it for writing and math too, as long as they are separate tests. So that as long as you know, if I've got math session 2, this group is 4001. I know who's in that group. That's the only thing you need to worry about. Okay?
Did you say that if it's the same group of kids testing session 1 and 2, the same code could be used?
You can use the same code, yes.
Can they use the same code for math as well? Like if they're,
You can, as long as you keep track of it, you know that those kids are pretty much the same.
right?
Yeah, you can do that.
Cindy, for makeup sessions though, you shouldn't give them a new code, right? Is it
Makeup sessions get their own code, yes ma'am. Yes ma'am.
Do you use the same group code for reading and math? Is it the same?
What did she say?
It was the same question.
Oh, it's the same question, yes.
For reading and math, is it the same teacher that's
Yes.
So I tie it to the teacher, the group code, right? So if they test with me for ESC, but then I'm doing makeup testing, they would have my group code, or I would need a different group
As
code?
long as you know by that code which kids are testing together. I don't care, well, you do care who they tested with, but as long as I know what teacher and what kids were in that classroom by that group code, any group code is fine. So in other words, for math session one group of kids can only have one group code. They can't go across two group codes for one session for one test. Yeah, okay.
Cindy, I have a question.
Okay, yes ma'am.
So I know you.
You're gonna have to talk louder.
Okay, I know you said that if a student is absent, then they get their own separate group code when they make it up.
Well, they may not be separate. If you've got 3 kids in that room, they'll all have the same group code.
All right. My question is, if the student, so let's say a student is present for session 1, they missed session 2, the students who are still there for session 2, can they have the same group code as they had for session 1? So so it doesn't matter if that one was absent, they'll be.
Yeah, just be aware that, but if you've got kids from 2 different classes, make up together. They can't have you don't want to give them a code from one of the other classes. Makeup sessions should probably have their own test group code, so you know it's a makeup session. Okay. Okay, student demographic information. Again, it's on the labels. They must have a label on them. Do not send it without a label. It will not be scored. I don't care how much information you actually write on that. What it's going to do is it's going to go off into the redo bin. And after everything else is scored and all the scoring is completed, then they will go back and they will send me information and say, we got this booklet that has this information on the front. Can you verify that? So it's going to be really late, well into summer, so that student will probably not get scores that will be rolled into either VAM or school grades. Okay? So don't do it. Please don't do it. They must have that label on it. We get a lot of booklets, even if they're hand gridded, and this goes for what we're going through right now, Access for L's. Please make sure those booklets are filled in. Okay? You just put in the student name, that is not going to fly, and it'll go off into Neverland until the end of all the scoring. And then we might at some point in time get information to try to fill that in. But don't think that, oh, well, somebody else will fill that in. It doesn't happen. They're not out there looking these up at either Pearson or DRC or any of these other scoring entities, because they score for other states too. They're scoring for all the other districts in the state plus other states. I guarantee you there is nobody out there looking these up. Okay, so make sure those are complete. Okay, you must use the regular PreIDD labels, and you must use the blank labels that are provided. They are special size. The others will not, the labels won't fit when you print them out on them, and you'll start getting wonky, and they'll be printed in between the labels. So please make sure you use the blank labels. We always have plenty of extra. School staff must verify and apply labels no sooner than 1 week prior to testing. Okay, you will get your booklets before that, but please wait until you absolutely know that you have to have this amount of time to get them done. But it should not be done more than 1 week prior to testing. Before applying the labels, make sure that you have someone going through the labels and take off the labels of students that have withdrawn. There is no point in putting them on a booklet if you know they are no longer with you. Okay? That's just a waste of a booklet. Now, we can put labels on top of labels now, but still, It's just an extra step you don't have to go through. So clean those labels up, have somebody pull off the withdrawn students, and that way you don't get that mixed up into it, and then it goes off to the teacher and she says, I no longer have this kid, and then you might not have enough booklets. The on-demand pre-ID'd labels. We will be going on how to create those during the TIDE training, so very important you participate in that. Again, try to use the highest quality printer you have at the school, because it is very important that these get read. We did report last year that a lot of the labels were smearing, and those were the labels that came from the printer. I guarantee you they have fixed that problem, because that did cause a problem with quite a bit of the scanning last year. But make sure that you don't get caught with that, and try to use the highest quality printer that you have on campus. We say this every year, and I keep wanting to take it out, but every year somebody calls us and says, Cindy or Bear, my clerical just put all the labels on top of the barcodes on the booklet, not where it says place label here. Every year. Well, when you stick a label over a barcode, you can no longer use those booklets. All those booklets are rendered useless because they can't scan the barcode of the booklet. You can't rip them off because they're on there. Okay, it just tears up the barcode. So you now have to come down and get 100 new booklets. You're going to have to print out all of those labels and reapply them. I know it seems silly, and it's not that people are stupid, but everybody has so much in their head right now with everything you have to do. And how many of you is testing the only thing you do in school? Not a single hand. I know that. You guys are some of the hardest working people I know. It's because people are busy and they get crazy and they don't think. So please, before you put the labels on, stop, close the door, and just think before you put those on. So stop, think before the labels go on. Trust me, it's worth that extra time. You need that little Zen moment, whatever it is. Just clear your mind before you do that. And that goes for any of the important tasks, or actually a lot of the tasks with testing. Because again, doing things wrong does have ramifications. Okay, again, fixing them, you just want to verify. No, you do not have to go in and look at every student on there and look up their pre-ID. But do check them and make sure they look right. I would spot check 1 or 2 of them. Make sure they look correct. Again, verify them against the roster that you're going to use for the testing. Make sure you've got the right kids matched up to the right booklets. Make sure they're in the right place. Make sure the Flea ID number is not blank on that pre-ID'd label. If it is, please go back and talk to your registrar and try to get a current Flea ID number or an accurate Flea ID number for that student so that you can put it into TIDE and then print out a new label for that student. Because without a Flea ID number, that student will not be scored. Again, goes into the place label here. Don't remove the labels once they've been affixed. Okay, you can print a new label if it's wrong, and they can go right over the incorrect label. Okay, let's talk real quickly about invalidations. The DNS bubbles are located on the school use only box. These are very important. Almost every year when we get reports of kids that did not get scores, we have a couple of them where the kid was bored because they got done with the test early and they fill in those DNS bubbles. Okay, if that DNS bubble is filled in, they will not be scored. Okay, So please make sure you look at those. If a student has done that, or one was done in error, the only way to fix it is to erase the DNS bubble and then bubble in the undo bubble. That ensures that that will be marked as a to be scored booklet. Defective materials, I'm going to kind of scan over that because we've really had very few defective booklets, but there are guidelines for those. Make sure you DNS them if you do have a defective booklet. Hopefully, if the teacher follows the directions in the script, they will have the students look through the booklet for the numbers, make sure all the numbers are correct, that there's no upside down pages. But we've had maybe a handful of booklets over the last 10 years, if that. It's generally not a problem. But there are guidelines, so if you have it, go back to your manual and they are in there. Okay. Your responsibilities are absolutely outlined in the school assessment coordinator checklist. Please use that. It's in the manual, just like you're seeing it here. If you go through and check all those items and get them done, you will have done everything you need to do to get through testing without a problem. Okay? So just be aware that it's very important that you use this, especially if you don't have your own or haven't been through this process before. Okay, you're going to receive your materials. Please make sure you check these in carefully. We have two new shippers this year that are taking materials from the warehouse to the schools. We have a lot of schools with very close names. It is very important that when you talk to your front staff about the booklets coming in, make sure that they check the top of the boxes and make sure that your school name is on every one of them. They will tell them how many boxes they are dropping off and make sure your person counts those. So that if it says that Ivy Lane is getting 10 boxes, you make sure that every one of those boxes has Ivy Lane on them and that you have 10. If you don't, you would immediately send an email to Barrington or myself and make sure that we know that you've got something missing. We will then call the shipper and say, we've got a problem here. It's usually that they've just sent one of the boxes off to another school or they've switched some boxes. So before you get too crazy, make sure what you got is what you're supposed to have. Okay? Once you get them and you have put them into your room, you want to open the boxes, take each of the shrink wrap packages out, line them up by what they are, grade 3 math, grade 4 math, or grade 5 math, and then count the packages. Make sure that that matches what's on your packing list. Don't open them, the shrink wrapped packages, but make sure you've got all of the packages and everything you're supposed to have. That's the first thing you need to do. If something is missing, you need to let us know immediately. Critical that that happens. You can't go through and once you open up the boxes and it's the, a week before testing, you've had the box for 2 weeks. Well, you wouldn't have had them that long, but maybe a week. And you start opening them up and you start putting labels on and all of a sudden realized, oh my God, this isn't what I was supposed to have. That's too late. Because at that point, you've had the booklets for almost a week. And I would have expected you to check them the second you get those boxes. Open them up and make sure that each of those packages has 25 in them or 20 or whatever they're supposed to have. And that you have this number of packages you're supposed to have and that the numbers match, the sequence numbers on the booklets. Okay, your school boxes, you're going to have checklists, rosters, labels, blank pre-ID labels, return labels. Very important. Please make sure you get that information, the labels and documents for sending materials back, and put them in a safe place. And then tell your husband or somebody you trust to know that and where they are so you can find them when it's time to return things back. Because there's not a lot of time to return these materials back. It's going to be a very quick turnaround time. Okay, assigning your test group codes, we've already talked about that. Printing your on-demand labels, again, more instructions about how to do that. Required information. Did I have a question?
I was gonna ask, I was looking at the calendar, and the week before testing is spring break. And then if we have a week to prep, would that mean we would receive our boxes
Yes.
March 6th?
You will have them in time to do your prep before spring break. Yes, okay. Making sure.
The week after spring break. Spring break is the week of like the 18th. So the week after you'll
Right,
have
so there's a week in between?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's still a week in between.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
Cindy, you said that, I'm looking at the, back to the school boxes, for returning, the test administration manuals are not secure documents. We get those back from the teacher and we recycle them, correct?
Right. Yep. Okay, those of you who haven't done paper in a while, the test material chain of custody form, very important document. You must keep this up to date. So you want to have that when you open your boxes, because it does ask you, when did you open your boxes and verify your materials? Very, very important that you have that test materials chain of custody form. There's one in the back of your manual. There is one on the Tide portal, and there is also one on the IMS page. So there's lots of places for you to pick it up. Very critical that you keep that every time materials change hands, because if something goes missing or you get investigated for any reason, that's one of the first documents they're going to ask for. And if you don't have it and upload it at the end of testing onto our portal so that we can pull it, I'm going to come to you and say, where is that chain of custody form? Seating charts. Yes, you do have to do seating charts. And also notice in here, we're giving you page numbers about where this information is in the manual. Assigning your proctors. All of that can be found on page 10. You're going to arrange for your special program students, your ESE, and your ELL students. And again, this is just that checklist. Going through it, you will get through everything you need to do. Ensuring your implementation of accommodations. Again, I can't stress this enough. We still have kids falling through the cracks and aren't getting their correct accommodations. And we know that a lot of those parents, they have, some of them even have hired extra folks to go to bat for them, you know, and to help coach them along. So it's not something that's going to go unnoticed. Making sure that everybody knows which of the kids have accommodations and how to give those accommodations. Overseeing the prep and training. We will be giving you a PowerPoint, rather like the one today, not as comprehensive, and it will be directed strictly at the teachers that you can use for your training. You do need to train every one of your teachers about what they can and can't do and all the information, and it will be in the PowerPoint. That should go up a little bit later this week and will be available for you. They also have to sit for the security course, but a lot of our teachers have already done that. But make sure that everybody is still there, because teachers come and go, and make sure that everybody that is going to be part of your testing process has gone through that training and has been part of your training as well. Yes, ma'am.
Just to verify, I believe you said this previously. APs and principals can administer the test?
Absolutely. APs and principals can. Any school employee can be a test administrator. It does not have to be a certified teacher. Hasn't had to been for several years now. Now, should they be? No. I know there's some teachers out there that I wouldn't appoint as a test administrator. It's between you and me and the walls, okay? But again, that's a decision you have to make just because they are a teacher. And if you have real concerns about it, I would find something else for that person to do. You don't have to make it obvious, but you know, there's just some that you know that she's going to be, either she's so close to retirement that she's going to be up front looking, you know, at cruises to Tahiti during testing or whatever it is. Would I put her in a testing room as the test administrator? No. Have her help you check in books or whatever it is so that you can keep an eye. But just know that test administrators do not have to be certified teachers. Some of your paras are perfectly capable of doing it with the right training. Some are not. It's up to you, and that is your call. Yes, ma'am.
Say you have volunteers that want to proctor, how could they take that security, the training?
You have a lot of what?
Volunteers.
There is, if you go out to the IMS page, there's one for employees and one for non-employees. And they can take that. They do not need to have a personnel number or anything to sign in. Yes, ma'am.
Going back to the prohibited practices of test security, most of our teachers have had the training when they did the iReady and they signed the iReady forms, the test administration authority.
They don't have to go through the security course again.
But they do need to sign, they need the FSA one.
Are we going to make them sign the new ones? Yes. We want the new ones just to ensure that everybody is covered. Yes. Okay. Again, your test administrators, give them those booklets. Your proctors don't need a book, the manual, but your test administrators do. So you want to make sure that if you haven't counted them in, make sure what you need before you come get them. They need to know who they're going to, which accommodations they're going to be doing so that they can read through how to give that accommodation. Some are not as simple as others. Electronic devices and breaks. When you train these guys, I can't stress enough how much you should stress to them the timing of breaks and the timing of the test, especially as it comes to accommodations, but even for regular ones. Most of our misadministrations have to do with timing. Oh, I didn't know they get a break. I didn't know that it was 85 minutes. I only gave them the first 45 minutes. Okay, it's crazy what we hear, but make sure you really stress that. I would put it on a sheet of paper that you stick on the top of bins. Remember, 40 minutes a break and the other 45 minutes, and you are only giving one session a day. That's the other one. They end up giving them both sessions. It's crazy what we hear. And again, it's not that people are dumb, but they've just got so much in their head. And this is a lot of stuff. I've already been up here for a little over an hour, and we're more than, I won't tell you how far we are. Okay, so just be aware that, you know, it's a lot of stuff, but stress that timing because that's where we see a lot of problems. Another thing about timing and accommodations, have your teachers check in with you when testing is complete. One of the problems we have is that teachers that do the accommodation classrooms, whether it be ESE or ELL, and they do not give the additional time. They just time it and let them go. You can recover from that and fix it if you know about it before the end of the day. But if you wait until the end of the day and Mr. Jones comes up and says, wow, we got through that really well. It took him exactly X number of time. And you say, Mr. Jones, did you give him the additional time? Oh, my goodness, no, I didn't. They're done. Because it's the end of the day, you can't bring them back in the next day and give them the additional time. It must be completed that day. If, however, Mr. Jones comes up and gives you his booklets, right, with all your regular teachers, and you say, Mr. Jones, did you give your kids the additional time? Oops, no, I didn't. You can now bring them back, get them back together, and give them their additional time. Okay, so that's critical. Make sure you know what's going on. When you get to that point where you think people should be wrapping up your regular classes, make sure that your accommodated classes are still working and yes, they have gotten back together if they took a break or whatever it is, and that they're getting their additional time. It's one of those checks that really makes things work so much smoother, and you will have less errors and problems. Okay, policies and procedures. Again, you're prepping your teachers to know what to do in the event of issues. And here we go. You want your teachers to know what to do if a student refuses to acknowledge the testing rules. Does that mean the student doesn't take the test? No, it just means that you're going to make a note on the documents, that your security documents, that student refused to sign it. And then you're going to let them go on and test. A test administrator is concerned that a student is unable to begin the test or finish the test. Again, this is something to really stress to your teachers. I can't tell you how many times that when we have a kid throw up on the test, the teacher says, I didn't think he looked very good at the beginning of the day. Or the front office says, yeah, Johnny looked kind of green when he walked in. Don't let that kid test. If he looks that sick, hold him to a makeup day. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing says we can't do it. But to start a kid that doesn't look good, or you think is going to not make it, chances are that's exactly what's going to happen. Yes, ma'am.
At the first training, you said that
You have to talk up louder. You guys use your teacher voices.
at the first training, you were talking about students that were saying that they would want to opt out. We just direct that to our principal, correct?
Okay, can somebody with a voice?
Opt out. Opting out. They want to opt out.
Okay, opting out. Let me get through this list and then I'll go through opting out. A disruption occurs, defective test and answer book, a PreIDD label contains incorrect information, a TA finds a pre-identified book in his or her classroom that does not belong to them, a test administrator needs additional booklets. All of these things your teacher should know how to handle. They should be able to get a hold of you. They need to know how to either handle this or know to call you so that you can help them out. You cannot be a test administrator for main testing. Your job is to make sure everything else goes very smoothly. You need to go over with them test security. Very, very important. They need to know the rule. You need to go over everything before they sign the test security agreement, the prohibited activities agreement. They need to know what they can and can't do. We are still getting issues of teachers doing really dumb things, and we have fired teachers and they have lost their certification. There is no reason for that to happen. These teachers need to know that they're going to get caught if they do. I mean, somehow it just happens. I mean, the one that just amazes me, the teacher that took pictures of the science test. And the next year, she goes to print them out on the copier, assuming the night before, after everybody had gone, and printed it out. Well, unbeknownst to her, the paper copier had run out of paper. The next morning, the secretary put paper in it, and out comes the rest of the test booklet. So I got called. They confiscated the teacher's computer. pen drives. We found several different documents that she was not supposed to have. She no longer can teach anywhere in the state of Florida. Okay? They'll get caught. Please talk to them. Do not let, just make sure they understand. It's not worth your job. Nothing is worth your job. Okay, arrange test item practice sessions. They need to take those practice sessions so they understand these new test items. You're going to manage the student information in TIDE. Again, the TIDE training will go through all of that. You're going to distribute test materials. On the day of testing, you're going to be responsible for providing each test person with the materials that they will need to do this. I've seen a lot of fun stuff go in there too. They'll give them hankies to dry their tears and M&Ms and all kinds of silliness, and that's fine, perfectly fine. Please don't give your kids candies. Now that we are back to paper testing, they shouldn't be allowed to have water unless a student has it on their IEP or something. They can have it during the break, give it to them, but you spill water all over those test booklets and it's a nightmare. I know everybody loves those little star mints, the peppermint ones. Kids don't leave them in their mouths, and then what happens? I've got sticky fingers, and that ends up on the booklet, and it sticks pages together. Paper is a whole new thing for us, and it can be a nightmare, honestly. So please think through those things before you get ready for test day. Provide the materials for testing. You're going to monitor the test rooms. We've talked about that. Make sure the security logs and seating charts are being completed. The test rule acknowledgments, it's important that you get those for each of the kids. The student who refuses to affirm the testing rules should be documented. Supervising makeup administrations. This one you can do if you absolutely need to. It's still important if you have quite a few of them that you still be able to monitor if you're going to have multiple rooms. But if you've only got one or two, you are allowed to do the makeups without a problem. The makeups must be done in the same order as you gave the original tests. So if you have a student who misses session 1, they cannot sit through session 2 and then make up session 1. What you can do is allow them to do session 1 at the same time that everybody else does session 2, as long as they get the correct instructions. The directions must be read to them separately so they understand what they need to do, because there are different directions for session 1 and session 2, but the timing is the same. So you can put that student back in with their classroom, let them do session 1, and then you will make up session 2. But you can't give session 2 until you've given session 1. Receiving test materials from administrators. Please make sure that you sign them in and out both days. Please have enough staff there to count. This is where your principal and assistant principals and extra people can come in really handy. If you didn't use them for testing, have them help you with the check-in and check-out. Do not check them in without counting them. Don't count them later. It's really hard to tell a teacher, well, I counted your materials and you were short. She's going to say, I gave you 25. That's what I signed out. If you didn't count them, who's to say? So please do that counting. Yes, ma'am.
With the example you just gave about the kid missing session 1 and then having to do session 2, I'm concerned about 5th grade specifically having to do 6 tests in 7 days. So if the 5th grader misses ELA, say, session 2 because they're absent, can they take ELA session 2 while everybody else is taking math session 1, as long as they get those directions read? Because there's only like 2, I think, makeup days after science.
It's going to be tight. Yes, you can do that. The question was, can you test a student with their group, ELA, if the other group, their classroom is taking math? I would be very careful with that. They must get their directions read to them. You can't just say, oops, here's the difference. You have to make sure that session is exactly the same as everybody else got. But again, as Dr. Gilbert said, this is going to be a tight time frame. There are not a lot of days for makeup. I am very concerned about our percent tested. Okay? Not so much for you guys, but it's going to be tight with the makeup days.
I just want to add, if you are having a kid make up their tests on the day when other kids are testing,
Well, they're going to make that, yeah, they're going to
then
lose
you also
that.
have to have them make up that session that they're missing. Generally speaking, try to get, I know that we generally say get the reading test done, that's the priority. However, if they're there for that math test, get that math test done. And then if you have another makeup day, then have them do the test on that makeup day.
Yeah, I wouldn't have them miss a test to give them a test. In other words, yeah, I didn't think through that one. Yeah, if they are doing the reading, hold off that second reading session and give them the math, and then, because you do have a couple of days after that to do the makeup for reading. If it is a question of you've got 2 days and the student has missed everything, give them reading. You cannot double up the sessions. Do not ask me. Just tell the parent that is against the state rules. We are not going to jeopardize the student's score just so he gets a score. We're going to make sure he gets the same chance as everybody else to do well on this test. Okay? So, reading before math if you don't have enough days. And if you've got 3 days, just do reading. Don't give them one session of math. They will not score that. You must have both sessions to get a score. Okay? Okay, let's keep on going because we still got to get through science too. Receiving materials, again, make sure you've got everything. That chain of custody form, you're going to scan and upload all your security documents. Okay, we're going to be sending out more instructions as we get closer to the end of testing, like the end of writing, which is the first one coming up. You're not going to be sending us a DACO box, the district coordinator only box. You will see that in the directions. Most districts, I expect that to disappear from the manual at some point, because most districts have copied what Barrington set up several years ago about scanning in these materials. They were like, oh my God, because before, if we needed something that was one of the security materials, we had to go down to the warehouse, find the box that was yours, pull out your documents, bring them back to the office. Now we just go in and look at the portal that we've got them stored in and pull it up.
How many years do we keep them for?
For the security documents, you want to keep those at least 2, right? 2 years for the security documents. That's how long that it could come back and it could be an issue. So you want to keep those on file somewhere. Again, no DACO box. Make sure that each test and answer book has a correct ID label, that they do have a Flea ID number on them. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry, our school's up for rebuild this summer. Do we still keep it on site or do I need to turn it into you?
Say that again.
Our school is up for rebuild this summer. Do I pack everything and send it to the district or keep it at my school?
That's a good question. I would say they need to go with other important documents for your school. They've got to be storing them somewhere, I suspect, in records management. There's
Hours when our school is rebuilt.
Yeah, there's got to be that just needs to be some of those where the important documents for the school goes. You want to talk to your principal about that, that those get included in that. Okay? Again, we've talked about those PreIDD labels, making sure you've got the Flea ID on them. Do not review the test content, student responses, or check through the books for stray marks. That is not acceptable. You should not be paging through those books. You can check the front cover, but even now that we don't have bubbles on the front cover, you shouldn't worry about it. The only bubbles you should worry about are the DNS bubbles on the front cover. Do not check through the booklets for stray marks. Again, if they've been invalidated, pages 14 and 15 of the manual have all the directions of how to handle those. Gridding those DNS bubbles. You want to make sure those DNS bubbles are appropriately hand gridded if they are supposed to be, and if not, handle them accordingly. Make sure that the PreIDD labels applied to special program students' test and answer books indicate the correct district and school number. Now here, when they're talking about the special program students, we're talking about McKay Scholarship students that are coming to your school for testing, home education students. They will have their own labels. You will get access in Tide to print out labels for homeschool students, okay? You might have FLVS full-time students. You will get labels for them. You will not put them in Tide. You will receive rosters and labels for them. Yes, ma'am.
We have a Florida virtual student that she's 6th grade. On her 6th grade reading, 6th grade math. So does that mean that we set up a computer-based testing environment for her?
Nope, because they take paper.
Their paper in 6th grade.
So she just does reading and math with the Florida virtual and comes to you for everything else? Then you can give her the 6th grade math. You will need to
Order them.
No, you'll need to order a booklet from us
So we'll order
for 6th grade.
for 6th grade. Okay.
But you'll get labels for her from FLV. No, you won't. Not if she's part-time.
So
She is,
we access it through Tide because I know we can access those students. So we print the labels.
right,
Okay.
correct. She'll print out. If she's not full-time, she's not going to print out as an FLVS student. She'll print out as a regular student of yours.
She doesn't show up like on whenever we run any sort of bubble sheets. She is not assigned any.
Okay, let's talk about that later because that's going to be a different situation. Okay, if you have specific information about a specific kid, let's hold those till the end so that we can keep this moving along. Okay, talked about the labels and verifying the ID labels. You want to update and make sure the information in Tide is correct. Again, you can't pre-ID a student or hand bubble a student. You must have a label for them, so they must be entered into Tide. Recording accommodations, you must record those accommodations that are used by students, and you're going to keep that documentation should it be requested by the state. Okay.
Not just on the book anymore.
No, you have to keep the information about,
Who used which accommodation?
it's not on the book at all. You keep that documentation now.
That is new.
Okay, you're going to gather the following materials. Again, you keep it on file for 2 years. Here is the information about uploading it into security. Don't get too wrapped in this yet because this isn't going to happen until the end of, the beginning of April. But we will send you additional materials about this, about how to do it. Some instructions just to remind you, but here's the information. You actually get to the site on our IMS page. If you aren't familiar with our IMS student assessments page and have it bookmarked on your front landing page on your computer, do it when you go back. We keep new information out there. All documents that you will be referring to are out there. The parent letters will be out there. you see it, and if you, I don't know if you can see it, but each of the elementary is on the far left. Each of the programs has its own site. That's where all of the documentation is for each of the sites. If you were going to be doing IMS or iReady, you pull up the iReady page, the GPO account is there, all the information is there about doing iReady testing. So this is your resource and where a lot of that information lays. So do absolutely bookmark this page and it'll really help you out. Okay, you're going to gather the following documents: manuals, unused planning sheets, and reference sheets if applicable. Recycle the materials. You shred any unused labels that have student information on them. Okay, the appendices. This is really helpful because each one of the state manuals are set up exactly the same way. If you pull up your reading manual and your science manual, they're laid out exactly the same way. The appendices, you always have all the accommodation information first. The FSA help desk number, which you probably won't need much since we're not computer-based testing with you guys. FSA paper-based materials return instructions. So when you get to the point of returning your materials, there's detailed instructions in there. We will also be sending out additional instructions for returning your materials as we get closer. Florida test security and statute rules and all your forms and signs are in the back. And here is just a more detailed of what's on each of those appendices. The accommodations has a lot of information. Appendix B has that help desk number. They don't show up in a pink bubble like Glenda did, but they are very helpful if you need them. For paper-based testing, most of your questions are going to come to Barrington and I. Appendix C, the return instructions. Boxing up the materials. Please make note of the Scotch tape at the bottom with the big red X. Barrington is the one that does most of the checking in of materials. Actually, he does all the checking in of materials. So please don't use packing tape yes, please do use packing tape. Do not use Scotch tape or masking tape. In Florida, we are so humid that your boxes will not stay taped in that capacity. These guys that pick materials up are not gentle with the boxes. They're trying to get a lot picked up in a very short time. So please make sure that you use real packing tape. If you haven't ordered it yet, please order it now. Go ahead and get a pack of 6 or 12 and just put it in your stash of materials because you will be needing it. And Appendix D, again, security statute and the security rule. And then all of the forms that you will need for testing. Okay? Any questions about that? Just in general in nature, if you have specific kids to talk about, we'll do that afterwards. No? You want to give them a 10-minute break? Yeah, why don't we give you a 10-minute break, Diane?
Are the letters to the parents going to be in other languages?
Yes, we are getting them from some of the other districts that have translated them. Okay, we're going to give you a 10-minute break. Please be very prompt. We've got all of science to go through, and we will see you back here in 10 minutes.
Good morning, ladies. We're going to get started, and gentlemen, we're going to get started in just another minute. Let's go ahead and talk about science for grade 5. So, of course, on May 8th, you will do science session 1. And then on May 9th, you will do science session 2. And then you have the remainder of the window for makeups. As Cindy mentioned before, we're just going to be touching on the main parts for today's training. Of course, you will refer to the science manuals for any specific information regarding the science administration. Those manuals will begin delivery today. Some of you will have already gotten them. The rest of you should have them by Wednesday, the very latest. The manuals this year are this nice, wonderful green color. They do cover both grades 5 and 8, but of course, make sure you're only paying attention to grade 5. The science test is a total of 2 80-minute sessions over 2 days. Make sure that for the makeup sessions that you are running, that you also administer the test over 2 days. Do not call us on the last day of the window asking, can you give session 1 and session 2? If you call me, I'm going to say no, and not to call anybody out, but sometimes you'll get an answer from me, so then you don't like it, so you call Cindy, she's going to tell you the same thing. So let me just have you save your breath, and vice versa. If you call her and then you call me, it's going to be the same thing. I'm going to tell you no, she's going to tell you no. Of course, for the purpose of resources, materials, that kind of thing, Pearson has what's called the Avocet site. It's not as user-friendly, in my opinion, as the FSA portal. However, it is there for your use. We will also provide additional resources on our IMS page. For customer service, they still have their phone number, and now they also have a web form if you need assistance. In most cases, because you will deal so very little with Pearson Access Next, my advice to you would just be to call Cindy or myself. Calling Pearson about your account, if you can't remember your username or your password, is also a waste of time. They're going to tell you to call Cindy or myself, so just call us directly. And then, of course, Jeanette can also assist you with resetting your password or telling you what your username is. In most cases, your username will be your personnel number at ocps.net. I said most cases. There are a few of you that have some way, somehow snuck in there, and it is your regular email, and that's okay. If you've had a duplicate account or something like that, generally we try to go in and change it so that it's consistent with everybody else's. So if you have any questions about that, as I said, just contact us and we will be more than happy to assist you. As Cindy mentioned before, as far as accommodations, 504 plans, IEPs, ELL kids, that has to be documented. We will talk more about that in the Pearson Access Next training, but generally speaking, that will be documented on your administration record and security checklist. We talked about the chain of custody form. There's a separate chain of custody form that has to be maintained for science, so make sure that you are doing that when those materials arrive. Also, you always want to make sure that you are checking the front and back covers of the test booklets once you get them from your students. Remember not to go in and erase stray marks, that kind of thing. Generally speaking, I wouldn't even look in the test booklet. As we've always mentioned before, or I've mentioned before, it feels nice and cool and comfortable in here. At my house, there's always air conditioning going on. If I look through a test booklet, that will jeopardize my ability to have air conditioning on at the house. Another thing that's very important to me is good toilet paper. Charmin, the quilted northern, that good stuff. I don't like really buying the stuff at the dollar store. It's a little rough. So therefore, if you don't look in the test booklet, you too can buy good toilet paper. All right, so now that we have that got out the way, don't break any test security rules so that you can have air conditioning. We know it gets hot, especially in the summer. And then you can buy good toilet paper. We've always talked about our FLVS kids. We'll notify you of those kids that will need to come to your school to test. please, please, please accommodate them. Parents will be parents. Some of them will show up unannounced. If you can accommodate them on that day, fine. If you cannot accommodate them on that day, that too is fine. And you can tell them, hey, I'm sorry that you didn't contact me in advance. Let's schedule you to come in on a makeup day so that your son or daughter can test. Some will be unhappy with you. As we always say, you get more flowers with vinegar. So if you're nice with, excuse me. Well, you do get flowers with vinegar, so you don't want that. But you want honey. So you get more bees with honey. If you're nice to them, generally they'll take it nicely as well. This is a big one, number 9. It's in bold. And you see the witch there. I'm not a witch. However, this can be a very big problem, is mispackaging or mislabeling your materials, especially for science. The reason being is because you have the separate test booklet and separate answer sheet. A lot of times schools think that the test booklets have to go with the to be scored materials, but then they forget to pack the answer sheets, which is actually more important than anything else. If Pearson does not receive your answer sheets, your school does not get science scores. We've had it happen last year. It should not happen this year. We try to go through the many boxes as possible, but keep in mind, it's hot in the warehouse. You know I like AC. So when I see your boxes, if I see one box and it says to be scored, I assume it's right. And then I should see multiple boxes of not to be scored materials. If it looks right, I don't check it. If it looks suspect, that's when I check it. If it has Scotch tape or masking tape, I'm going to look at it, I'm going to talk about you, I'm going to call you about it, and then I'll fix it. Just being honest. Jeanette will tell you. All right. We're not deviating from the schedule. Do not ask unless there's a hurricane, and hurricane season begins a long ways from here. It doesn't snow, so you don't have to worry about that. And we're not taking field trips on the 8th and 9th, so make sure that you're administering the test on those days. We've had to report to the state that we're giving the test on those days, so any deviation, we have to report to the state. Cindy talked about Appendix A. It's the same in the Pearson manual. And it talks about accommodations. Make sure that your test administrators are well aware of the accommodations of the students that will be testing with them. If you need to partition a booklet for a kid, you can use the paper clips and so forth like that. For the kids that need to test over several days. There are very minute cases where that's necessary. If you do have questions, then give Cindy or myself a call about that. As we mentioned before, the test is paper-based. So if you have kids that need to receive special materials, Braille, large print, then of course we'll get those taken care of for you via the paper-based accommodation process. And then, of course, accommodations for ELLs can be found on page 88 and 89. For makeup testing, make sure that you're always following the test security policies. We cannot talk about that enough. You always want to make sure that secure materials are locked away securely. Only 3 people should have keyed access to where those materials are being stored. They should never be in a teacher's classroom overnight. They should not be in your car overnight. We have had issues where teachers have picked up materials, had them in their cars overnight. As a luck of the draw, their car is not where it should be the next morning because somebody has taken it for a joyride, that kind of thing. Yes, ma'am. We have been speaking with our leadership and our director, Frank Gilbert. If you do have issues with that, let us know and we can help out in that situation for you. Of course, tests need to be administered in order. Session 1 comes before session 2, both on separate days. So we will talk about that later. There are sample materials available, and we encourage you to share those with your students and teachers. That way they can be familiar with the format and layout of the test. Science has always been paper-based, but of course they're only taken by the students in grade 5, so it's very helpful to them in advance of testing. Calculators are not permitted for grades 5 science, all right? No calculators, don't have them in the room, don't put them in the bin. If they're in the bin, of course, somebody's gonna attempt to use them because they assume it's allowed. Calculators are not allowed for FSA grades 3 through 5, nor for the science test. For Pearson, you will need to print the labels. We have pre-ID the students. When it's time for testing, they will be displayed in Pearson Access Next, so that if you need to print a new label for a student, you will have access to do so. If you get new students, you'll also be able to add them in and then print a new label for them. Cindy has mentioned this. I'm going to mention it several times before this training is over. Make sure the labels are put where the labels are supposed to go. You guys laugh. We think it's funny. Actually, it is funny, but at least 3 of you are going to call me at some point in the next couple of weeks and say, hey, somebody put the labels in the wrong place. I need new test booklets. Of course, we will provide you with the new test booklets and or answer sheets as needed. But a lot of that could be avoided if they just relax, pay attention. They're not watching their stories while fixing labels. They're not drinking coffee. That's another thing that seems to happen is coffee gets spilled on test booklets. Yeah, drink your coffee, finish all of it, then put the labels on your answer sheets for science. Of course, make sure kids are using number 2 pencils for testing. If the document is not pre-ID'd, if it doesn't have a label, it will not be scored. In August, of last year, Cindy and I went to a meeting where they showed us basically pictures of what happens once materials reach the warehouse of the vendor. You've all been teachers. When you have papers to grade, you grade all the easy ones first. The ones where you can't find the name of who did it or it looks like there's going to be a lot of issues, you just put it to the side and you deal with it when you're done. That's the same thing the vendors do. So you don't want to have issues with all of the materials you're submitting. Try to have them to be as accurate as possible so that they can be scanned and graded or scored, at the appropriate time. Accommodations, make sure that the proper information is gridded on the booklet. Of course, only you guys should be doing this and not having the students because, of course, they wouldn't know what to grid. And then, of course, make sure that on the labels or so what's being gridded, that it is accurate. Generally speaking, for my personal peace of mind, if I have to bubble anything, I do it. I never let the kids do it because, of course, kids will be kids. Yes, ma'am. You will receive a shipment of pre-ID labels, but if you're missing any for like new kids or kids that weren't there for pre-ID, then yes, you'll need to print labels for those kids. Her question was, in case you guys didn't hear, was whether or not you guys will be receiving labels or will you have to print them? The answer to that is yes, you will receive a shipment of labels, but if you need to print additional labels, you will have that ability. No, ma'am. Oh, and I'm so glad you asked that because the labels for Pearson are very different from the labels of Tide in terms of the information and the layout. Make sure that you are putting a Tide label on your FSA booklets and a Pearson label on your science booklets. If I do catch that, keep in mind I'm at the warehouse. I don't have a printer to fix it, so sometimes those get returned late. But of course, I generally don't check through your boxes because I assume you guys do such an awesome job testing our students that the boxes too will be as they need to be. But if I do catch something just randomly, we do try to fix it for you. We talked about issues with the grid sheets, if it's wrong. Another reason why we don't have kids doing it, and I've seen this over the last couple of years, even with the middle school kids, so don't feel bad about the elementary school kids. When they bubble the booklets themselves, for some reason they don't know how to bubble. So what they do is they'll bubble their entire name in the first column, not across, and then of course that's going to be an issue. I don't have arthritis yet, but of the number of books I've had to rebubble, it's not fun. So just do it so the kids don't have to mess it up, and then I don't have to bubble the booklet. But of course, even if they did do that and you check the booklets, then when I get the box, it should be good to go, right? That's how that works. All right. All right. We talked about printing them. Make sure you print them on the good quality printer. If you know that the printer is not the best printer in the school, don't use it. If you are on rations on ink, don't use it. You know, I'd rather print the label for you and apply it when I get to the warehouse than for you to print a label and it's not good quality. One thing that does work, give me 1 second. One thing that does work is the label sheets, the blank labels that you get from Tide. You can print the Pearson labels on those blank sheets. That will work, but don't put a Tide label that says FSA reading on a science booklet. Your question.
So the FSA booklets don't have anywhere to grid. You have to print a Tide label. Since science does have a place to grid, can you grid if you're missing like one label, or do you still have to print a science label?
They will not look at it unless it has a label on it. All right. Test group code policy is the same for FSA, so I won't go specifically into that, but just make sure that you are creating your test group codes. Some of you will call and say, hey, Barrington, where can I find the test group codes? I don't know where you can find them, but I will tell you that it is a 4-digit code that you make up and make sure that it's unique to each testing group. Of course, when you get your materials, make sure that you look in the white box. That's where all of the information that you as a testing coordinator needs will be located. Make sure that you inventory everything that you receive. You will have a packing list. If the packing list says you should have 41 test booklets, and when you count, you have 40, that is a problem. And again, you like AC, and you also like good toilet paper. So you want to make sure that you notify us right away that you're missing a booklet, and then we will take that up with Pearson. Generally speaking, though, don't be offended. If you call and say I'm missing a booklet, I'm going to ask you, have you emptied all of your boxes and double checked? It's not saying that you don't know what you're doing. It's for my own personal peace of mind. And I'm sure Cindy will do the same. Sometimes when it's just loose booklets in a box, sometimes they stick to each other, or you may not see them under other materials. For some reason, sometimes they'll put the labels and one test booklet in a box, and it's a big old box like this. So if you haven't gone through all your boxes, sometimes you can miss those onesie, twosie booklets. Yes, ma'am.
I know like for the FSA, we keep the test codes the same for, for the for 5th grade 5001. Can we use that same code for the NGSSS?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Her question was, can you use the same test group codes for science? Yes. Yes, because it counts as a different test. If you're reusing the numbers, that is okay, as long as they are unique. Of course, when you get your materials, chain of custody form needs to be completed. And then, of course, make sure that you know where to locate that sheet, because when the materials leave, you'll need to document when they were picked up. Make sure you're putting the right labels on the boxes. You will receive red labels for your to be scored and white labels for not to be scored. Make sure that kit that you receive those materials in, that you put them up in a safe place. Generally speaking, what I used to do when I was testing coordinator, I put them in the box they came in, and I put it on one of the highest shelves in the office. And the reason why I would do that is because, sometimes you have people helping, they move things around thinking they're being helpful, and you don't want to be in a panic when it's the end of the window, you're packing up your materials, and now you can't find the labels that need to go on the boxes. Here are the materials you will receive for science testing. You will receive the PreIDD roster, which is the list of all the kids that has a PreIDD label. If you are 8th grade, which that doesn't really apply to you, periodic tables for them. And then, of course, you will have a test booklet and an answer book for science. All right? Just want to reiterate that again. You will have a test booklet and a separate answer book for science. The boxes that you receive your materials in, make sure you save them. The crushed up paper or the air packs that come in the box, save those as well. They come in very helpful when you're having to repack those materials. Test group codes we talked about again. We will also have a test administrator training PowerPoint made available for you. Don't forget the administration record and security checklist. We will have a Excel version that you guys can use. You're not required to use that one. It may be more helpful because you can scan the test booklets that are assigned to those students onto the Excel document using one of the barcode scanners. Some of you like to use it, others of you don't. That is perfectly fine. It is there for your use if you choose to use it. Seating charts. Seating charts are required for the science test as well. The information that is specific to the seating charts is found on page 21 and 22 of the manual. Make sure you take a look at it. Generally, it asks for the test group code, the date, the test administration, the test administrator's name, all that good stuff. Make sure you have that available as well. When it's time to prepare your materials for testing, you want to make sure that everyone, proctors, whether it is a paraprofessional, cafeteria worker, office staff, whoever's going to be helping you with testing has been trained. Cindy talked already about the test security training. Therefore, make sure that everyone is in compliance. For your teachers that are administering the special documents, large print and braille, make sure they are aware specifically of the little nuances that are specific to those tests. In some cases, it's a little bit different than the general test. So make sure that they are aware of that and the accommodations that they are providing. For proctors, as we mentioned before, they can be volunteers. Many of you call and ask if interns can be proctors or test administrators. Generally speaking, they can be there as an observer, but they should not be the proctor in the room. All right, just keep that in mind for your interns from UCF and elsewhere. Electronic devices. Back when I was in high school, very few of us had cell phones. Some people still had the little two-way pagers and stuff like that. I know Madison knows what I'm talking about. However, now little kids, I have little cousins that have cell phones. So make sure that those devices are put away. I don't know why a 3-year-old needs a cell phone, but that's another conversation. But make sure they're put away and that they do not have access to them during testing. You may have some students, however, that are diabetic, so that device needs to be out. Of course, the test administrator should be made aware of that. The device is not on the student's desk. It should be on the test administrator's desk. He or she should be aware of how it will alert them if there's an issue and the protocol of what to do if the students' levels are not where they need to be. Just make sure that they're well aware of that in advance and not just on the morning of testing.
Okay, there is a new one now, that's the watch, and it does need to stay on the kid's wrist. So it is very important that you keep monitoring that student, and somebody's really keeping an eye, making sure the student is not accessing anything on the watch, okay? It is gonna mean almost a one-on-one, but if you've got a proctor in the room, that proctor needs to be watching to make sure that student is not accessing the watch. Okay? Because it's the watch that is actually monitoring that. If you can keep it on the desk, that's great. On the test administrator's desk, that's great. But if not, make sure you're keeping an eye on that student.
All right. Also, for your kids, especially the ones that are receiving extended time, you want to make sure that they do not have access to their devices during those breaks. So if they're going to lunch, they don't get to call mommy and tell her about testing during the break. They don't get to play any games or anything on their cell phone during lunch. Make sure that they do not have access to those devices. Make sure your test administrators are reading the scripts verbatim. If a kid refuses to sign the acknowledgement form, you still carry on. They still test. Make sure that if a kid is disruptive, that you have protocols in place onto how to deal with that. Generally speaking, having a one-on-one conversation with the kid and moving them to another room generally solves it in most cases. But if they continue to be disruptive, or if you see that they're being disruptive, don't just automatically invalidate the test. Try to work out a situation as to where that kid can still get tested on that day. Sometimes just simply pulling them out and testing them one-on-one is fine. Testing them one-on-one isn't giving them an unfair advantage. It is, however, allowing the other kids to test without any disruptions.
So even though that's not an accommodation for that child, it's okay?
Yes, if you need to pull them out. Now, what I wouldn't do is, because this also comes up sometimes, if you know that Johnny tends to be disruptive, don't just automatically schedule a one-on-one session for Johnny. Johnny goes in the room with everybody else. If he is disruptive, then you already have a plan in place. But if not, Johnny may be on his best behavior that day, and then you'll be like, wow, here's a candy bar or something, because you've been so well behaved, of course, after testing.
If we do have that situation and we need to put them in another room, do we need to change the test group code, or will it stay the same as the group they were with?
If you're pulling them out to another room or moving them to another room, then I would leave that test group code on there. However, on the seating chart of the room that they left and the new room that they're going into, I would document that you've moved that student to another room.
Would that be the same for extra time kids too? Like if the test is over and I pull them?
Yeah, so if you're her question is, if you're consolidating a room for ESC or your ELL students, well, you need to change, and you're moving them to another room, you would do the same thing. You would document on the seating chart of the room that they were in that they were moved to another room, and then you would also document on the new seating chart. But you would just leave the test group code as the original one. Make sure that for science, in the back of each of the manuals, there is a prohibited activities as well as the security agreement. Make sure that they're also signing those as well. But if they've already done one for the FSA testing, then you can use that one for the Pearson test. But if they haven't given any of the other tests, make sure you have that one signed for them. You will need to upload it for this specific administration, but they don't need to sign it a second time if they've already done the FSA. But if they have not done any of the state testing, which is FSA in this case, if they haven't done writing or anything like that, they will need to sign the one for science. Yes, ma'am.
Just a question for clarification. At the beginning of the year,
Right.
That's the same course that helps them for the full year of anything.
Correct. So as far as the course on Canvas, the test security training course, they only need to do that once per school year. So they've already done it for this school year, they're good. We're talking about the course. As far as the documents, that will of course need to be signed again. But as long as you have the certificate available and you've made copies and you scanned it at least once for the school year, you should be good. Yes, ma'am.
One more question back to the seating chart.
Yes.
So we merge them, make a note, the group codes, we document those different group codes on that new seating chart, correct?
Right.
So we'll just document that we are moving them from year to year.
Right.
Okay.
Florida Department of Education recommends room sizes of kids of 25 or fewer, especially at the elementary school level. I can't imagine why you'd want more than that in a room. But remember, if you have more than 25 in the room, you need to make sure you have a proctor. Generally speaking, especially for elementary school kids, if you can provide a proctor and a test administrator for each room, that is fine. It's not required if there's less than 25 kids in the room, but it's very helpful for the test administrator if a proctor is in there to assist him or her. We talked about the special program kids, making sure that you're accommodating them, home education, FLVS, McKay Scholar. There's another one called the Guardian Scholar, all that good stuff. If they contact you, make arrangements for them to test. If you have questions specific to that when they call, just give me or Cindy a call and we'll walk you through how to handle that. Make sure they have accommodations done. We've already talked about that many, many times, but it is important. Make sure that you're giving the correct accommodation to the correct student. Generally speaking, kids who are receiving accommodations, their parents will always advocate for them. But if you give them the accommodations they should be receiving, then generally you won't have the parents contacting you after the fact about that. If you're not sure about an accommodation, always check in with your staffing specialist. He or she can guide you through how to provide that accommodation for that student. And then, of course, you want to make sure that it's an accommodation that's allowable for testing. We've already talked about the large print and braille. Here are the page numbers as to how to administer those tests for those students. It comes in very handy, so make sure that you are following that. Yes, ma'am.
I have a student, well, a couple with accommodations where they can transcribe, somebody else can write in on a Scantron for them, or bubble in for them. How would we?
Basically, you would provide a scribe for that student.
At that moment, or can they do it?
It varies, but you can call me or Cindy and we can talk about that because it varies kid to kid. Some kids, based off their IEP, they fill in the test booklet and then someone transcribes it to another booklet. In other cases, they point to the answer and somebody just bubbles it for them. So just give me a call and we'll make sure that you are in compliance. Of course, you always have to have documentation for accommodations. For example, I had a parent that called me last week about requesting an accommodation for a kid just for testing. She had some documentation, but it didn't really lead to what should be done for instruction. So you always want to make sure that you have the correct documentation for the accommodations. Generally speaking, your staffing specialist is who will handle that piece for you. So I wouldn't get too involved in that, but make sure if you have any questions about an accommodation that it is backed up by an IEP or a 504 plan. Make sure that the setting for testing is appropriate. Generally speaking, this means that if there are any posters, make sure that they're taken down or covered. Make sure that kids are not seated in rooms that have stadium-style seating. If that is the case, try to stagger the seats. Generally speaking, I assume most elementary schools don't have that type of seating, but I do know some of the middle schools do. Try to avoid testing in the cafeteria if you can. I know sometimes it's unavoidable. Of course, you also want to avoid testing in the gym. There's a lot of echo because there's not much in gymnasiums, so you want to try to avoid that as much as possible. Make sure rooms are free of distractions. If you need to have a walkie-talkie in the room, make sure they're turned down. If it's a room that people walk back and forth walk past often, maybe have it so that the kids are facing away from the windows so they're not watching each person walk back and forth in the hallway. Bless you. On the day of testing, you want to make sure that your test administrators are distributing the materials correctly and following the script. When they come to pick up the materials, make sure that you are verifying that if they are taking out 25 test booklets, that you have watched them physically count 25 test booklets. Don't just assume that simply because you're really good friends with Toyka, that Toyka is going to count and be accurate. You want to make sure that you are following up and making sure that the correct numbers are in there. Also, as much as perfectionists that test coordinators are, you may count. One of those late nights when you're testing office and your stomach is growling and you're thinking, what am I cooking for dinner today? And did I go grocery shopping, or can I just order some wings? Which don't order wings on Super Bowl day. It's horrible. But seriously, you may forget a test booklet. So just make sure that you're double checking, and that if they do say that there's an issue with their counts, that you just verify that yes, indeed, there's an issue, and that you correct it right then and there. We talked about covering posters and so forth like that. Of course, you want to make sure that there is a seating chart, security log, pencils in the bin, restroom passes, Kleenex, all those little things that your students will need. Make sure they're in the bin and available for your test administrators. Of course, and this is a very good thing to keep in mind, we talked about on our call last week that the state will not be coming in to monitor any of our schools in our district. However, it's a good idea to check on your test administrators while testing is going on. And you're not going in to, again, kind of catch them with their pants down, but you're walking in and making sure that everything is as it should be. And then that way, if there's an issue, by you walking in and checking on them, you can kind of fix it before it becomes a bigger issue later. Now, of course, don't go in and cause a distraction and laugh and, make jokes with the test administrator. But, sometimes just simply sticking your head in the door will be very helpful. They may have had a question that they didn't realize they should have asked you, but simply seeing you, let me ask, Cindy about XYZ. It could be as simple as the label came off, what should I do? Or, hey, we've been testing for 25 minutes and, there's an issue with the AC. We need to go to another room, that kind of thing. So just kind of popping in, checking on your test administrators is very helpful. I know sometimes after you have gone through, you got everybody testing, you're like, oh, thank you, Jesus. Let me go put my feet up and relax. But check on everybody. You can relax at 2:45 when school gets out. And then, because I know testing is a very mentally draining day. Generally, I used to try to leave on time on testing days just because my mental capacity was spent, by 2:15. Make sure the seating charts are filled out correctly. Generally speaking, you want to do that as you get the materials that day. Having someone fix the seating chart, having someone fix the seating chart 3-4 days later, they're not going to remember where Jonathan sat on Monday and you're coming to them on Friday. So if you can kind of quickly check to make sure that everything is filled out. Another thing that test administrators tend not to do is fill out the security log the top correctly. Make sure that you're checking that and that they have completed that information correctly. They put the correct date, the correct session, that kind of thing. We talked about the testing rules acknowledgement already. For makeup sessions, of course, you're going to ensure that as many students as possible are there for makeup sessions. You're going to schedule them. We know that with all the testing you will have done, reading, math, science, it's probably going to be very difficult to find someone to do a makeup session for you. So if you need to step in and do 1 or 2 makeup sessions, go ahead and do that. We talked about the materials, being in cars overnight. Don't do it. Don't be lazy and say, oh, I'll just leave them in your room since you're going to be doing makeup testing tomorrow. Make sure they're always locked up no matter what. Remember, after testing is done, if you sent them out with 25 test booklets and 25 answer sheets, make sure you get them back. Don't wait until the end of the day to collect materials. If testing is 90 minutes, at 95 minutes, you should already have most of the bins back or a plan for getting them back. Don't let them sit in the testing rooms all day and then after school, you're making your rounds to pick them up. Many of the issues that occur could have been fixed had you gotten the bin earlier in the day. Especially if it has to do with timing. If you realize that Ms. Johnson is calling you at 10:15, but according to your schedule, testing shouldn't be done until 10:30, that's an issue. But if you just wait and till everything's supposed to be done, then you will not know that Ms. Johnson only gave 45 minutes instead of the correct time. If you find that something is missing, don't be ashamed, don't be embarrassed. Call Cindy or I right away. I'm not going to yell at you. Cindy's not going to yell at you. I'm going to tell you to search your entire school, check garbage cans, that kind of thing. But don't be ashamed to let us know something is missing. The longer you wait, the longer it could have ended up other places. Sometimes kids put them in the book bags by accident, that kind of thing. And then now it's been home, and luckily the one time it did happen, the parent found it before she even left campus. This parent happens to, kid gets in the car, she looks in the book bag, looks for homework, that kind of thing. She found it, and we were able to get the booklet back on the same day. But just make sure that you're always counting, double counting, triple counting to make sure that everything is where it needs to be. We've already talked about the materials that need to be scanned and uploaded. Make sure that you have them available, and then that, of course, you are scanning them. Do not wait till June, July to scan them. Generally speaking, we know that there's a lot of testing going on, but try to scan them the week after the administration window has ended. Do not send DACO boxes with your shipments. If you do, I'm going to call you and say, Chris, we have your DACO box here. Of course, I'll check it to make sure there are no test booklets in it, but then we're going to have you come and pick them up, all right? Because we don't want to be responsible for the documents in them. So just make sure that you're scanning them. I know the manual says to prepare it, but now, because so many other districts are kind of doing the same thing as us, it also says, or follow the directions of your district assessment coordinator. Again, make sure that the DNS bubbles are not bubbled in on the test booklets if it's not supposed to be. If it's bubbled in when they get to the vendor, then the vendor just goes by what's bubbled. So if there's a mistake, make sure you have filled in the undo bubble. Also, make sure that if it's a defective booklet, make sure it goes in the not to be scored box. All right, if it's defective, make sure it goes in the not to be scored box. Also, make sure that your test booklets go in the not to be scored box. For science, I'm going to say that again. I saw quite a few heads perk up. Test booklets go in the not to be scored box for science. When you're returning your materials, you will likely only have one box for to be scored, and it will be of your test answer sheets. All right? I'll say that one more time. To be scored will be one box in most cases, unless you're at one of those very large elementary schools. You'll have one box for to be scored. The only thing that should be in there is your answer sheets. Generally speaking, if I pick a box up, I can tell that something's in it. We try to catch as many of it as possible, but things happen and that's okay. But again, to be scored materials is just the answer sheets. Again, make sure you're not using masking tape or the Scotch tape. Also, because you're only going to have probably about this many answer sheets to send back, make sure that you are stuffing the boxes with that extra paper that comes in, or the airbags that come with your shipment. Save those, because what happens is if you put a heavy box on top of those boxes that are not filled in all the way, what tends to happen is they will crush, and then we have to rebox them at the warehouse. Here are the documents that need to be scanned. Give me 1 second, Diane. Make sure that you're following the test security document manual that we have created for you. It tells you in that manual how long to keep certain materials, when you can destroy them, if you can shred them, or if it needs to be stored, that kind of thing. So make sure that you are following the directions in that guide we've made available for you. Yes, ma'am.
For all of them, both the FSA and the NGSSS, do we use the plastic bags and put them in and zip tie them?
So Pearson does not require the use of the bags. For DRC, yes, you do have to use the bags for DRC. They supply them. But for Pearson, which is the science test, you don't have to put them in bags. Again, we're just showing you where on the IMS page to find the TDM security document guide, so that you can upload your documents. It also has in there the link that you can access to upload those documents for your school. I recommend using the scan to USB method. It's a lot easier. It makes life easier rather than having it go to your email a few sheets at a time. We mentioned before, manuals, unused planning sheets, unused answer sheets, all that good stuff can be recycled at the end. However, you do not recycle test booklets, all right? Never recycle a test booklet. Those are secure and they must be returned to the vendor. Again, make sure you're putting the correct label on your boxes. A lot of times, this happens every year. The vendor gets a box that's labeled to be scored, and it has the not to be scored materials in it. I can assure you that when I'm at the warehouse, we get all your boxes. What I do is your to be scored materials go on one pallet, and your not to be scored materials go on another pallet. When the truck comes to pick those materials up, the first thing that driver loads are your to be scored materials. The not to be scored materials are then loaded last. And the reason why they do that is just in case everything can't fit on the truck, then some of those not to be scored materials get left behind, and then we'll schedule another pickup. When they get to the vendor, the not to be scored stuff just goes and gets stacked, and they say, okay, we'll worry about it later. And then, of course, the to be scored stuff is prioritized so that they can get your scores back by the end of June. If materials are labeled incorrectly, they're not going to get looked at until July, August, and then, of course, when your school grades come out and your scores are low because you're expecting something else, or because when you look at your percent tested for science and it shows that it was 2% or no kids tested, and your principal's like, but we did test science, generally that is the reason. So make sure that you're using the right labels for the right boxes. The appendices are the same as we mentioned before. And I'm looking at the clock, I can't believe it. Because we've actually made it to the end. This is the first year we don't have 300 slides, thanks to Cindy. So of course, a few things before we wrap things up. Some of you may have questions. Of course, we'll make ourselves available for those. The blue sheets. Can I borrow yours real quick? Make sure you fill these out both the front and on the back side. This is the component number. It is a total of 3 points. Jeanette has already gone upstairs in preparation or in anticipation of those of you that will be coming up to pick up materials. So before you leave, please bring your blue sheets up here to Cindy or myself. Make sure you have included your personnel number and your name on it so that you can get the points needed.
And I want you to notice 2 things. One, how many of you all want to watch the Wizard of Oz tonight? Yeah? No? Nobody? Okay. And 2, the next time you go sit in your bathroom, how many of y'all are going to think of Barrington when you look at the book?